All righty.
I think we are live on YouTube.
Great. Thanks, everybody, and welcome to House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. It is Thursday, March 20th, and we are here. I need to look at our agenda. We are here to continue taking testimony on the broader issues surrounding H289 with two members of the Climate Council. So we have been learning a lot about the Climate Council, the Climate Action Plan, and so we've invited two members to come in and fill us in a little bit more about their roles on the council, how the council works, and some other general guiding questions that seem like they would be useful. So, and then we'll have plenty of time, I believe, afterwards to just ask them any questions that we have, and as their testimony goes along as well. So I am Representative Kathleen James from Bennington Ford.
Scott Cabell from St. John Gray, County Essex. Richard Bailey, L2. Chris Mara, Wyndham, Observe Bennington. Michael Southwest, Caledonia, Christopher Howland, Rutland, Florida.
Jared Torrey, Washington 2.
Brian Klubner, Citizen 13, Burlington.
Laura Sibilia, Wyndham 2.
All right, and our guest.
Thomas Weiss, resident of Montpelier.
Allison Espetti, Danville resident.
John Braban, Vermonters for Clean Environment.
Great. Well, you guys will introduce yourselves in a moment.
Matt, intern for Lisa Zango.
Great.
Jack Lockyer, Committee Assistant.
Super. All right, why don't we have our folks join us? Are you going to come one at a time?
Jared will start, then I'll join.
Super. Jared. All righty, for the record.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Jared Duvall. I am an appointed member of the Vermont Climate Council. So go ahead.
Super. And you have testimony to share today?
Yes, I provided Jack with the testimony as prepared in response to some questions received just about some background and context about how the Climate Council works and our current work. And so I'm happy to go through that, and then after would also be happy to address some of the topics that came up in committee testimony and discussion yesterday. So to start, I'm testifying today in my capacity as an appointed member of the Vermont Climate Council. I want to be clear that my testimony is solely in that capacity and does not represent a position of the organization that I work for. So for context, I've served on the Climate Council since October 22nd of 2020. I was among the first group of appointments. I was appointed to a 3-year term by the Senate Committee on Committees as the member of the council that is from a Vermont-based organization with expertise in energy and data analysis. I was reappointed by the Senate Committee on Committees in 2023, and I'm currently in the middle of my second 3-year term on the council. On the council, I serve on the council steering committee. I chair the science and data subcommittee, and I also serve on the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, which Councilor Cowart, who will testify next, co-chairs. So in terms of some of the contextual questions about the council, I wanted to respond to those. One was what is the role of the council in advancing state climate policy, and what responsibilities does the council have? And I'm not going to go through it all here, but I did pull out and excerpt the relevant sections of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is helpfully very clear about the council's responsibilities. And there are a number, but the primary responsibility of the Climate Council is to draft and then every 4 years revise and update the state's climate action plan. And that plan is to contain the strategies and actions that can lead to accomplishing the commitments that are in the Global Warming Solutions Act on a range of options, including reducing climate pollution, including resilience and adaptation, and all doing so. I want to highlight that the statute is very clear in a directive to the council and to councilors that work, the recommendations be grounded in a consideration of and prioritization of what are cost-effective and equitable strategies for Vermont and Vermonters. Specifically, there is language in the Global Warming Solutions Act that says that the council shall identify which strategies and programs will result in the largest greenhouse gas emissions reductions in the most cost-effective manner. And there, are many other kind of relevant pieces. There's a whole section on what the climate action plan shall contain, which is a directive to the council. And again, in that section of the Global Warming Solutions Act, it says that or one of the things that it says is that the climate action plan shall prioritize the most cost-effective, technologically feasible, and equitable greenhouse gas emissions reductions pathways and adaptation and preparedness strategies informed by scientific and technical expertise. So there's more there, but I think that the main takeaway is that there is a really clear list of roles and responsibilities directed to the council that is contained in the Global Warming Solutions Act, and that is our blueprint. That is our reference point for our work and our responsibilities. In terms of how often the council meets, council meeting frequency varies. It depends on largely where in the 4-year cycle we are in relation to writing or revising Vermont's climate action plan. So for instance, this month, the council will meet 3 times. And that's kind of more than usual, but as we near this July 1st, 2025 deadline to revise Vermont's climate action plan, we're picking up that meeting frequency. And I expect for the next number of months, at least 2 meetings a month will likely be the norm. There are 5 subcommittees of the Climate Council, and they meet on varying schedules, some as many as twice a month. And then there are also work groups for those subcommittees that do a lot of work in terms of background research, analysis, drafting of material that then goes to the subcommittees for consideration and then may be lifted up to the council for consideration. So as an example of that, I have served on the thermal work group of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, which is looking at possible recommendations for how we can reduce climate pollution and reduce energy costs in our thermal sector. And that work group, I think, met 18 times over the fall and early winter. And the result was draft material that was then shared with the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee that was then considered and has now been lifted up to the council in the form of draft recommendations that are right now going out for public engagement and feedback. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. There was a question, but sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, so I'm just following along with your testimony, Jared. So we've got plenty of time. We don't have to be on the floor till 10:30. So we'll get high level and ask some questions now, and then we can dive back in. I've got a bunch of questions already, so I didn't want to slow your roll. Rep Sevilla?
I don't want to slow your roll either. I just want to make sure that you are, I am interested in the thermal. Are you talking about that later on here?
I can. I mean, Rich is better positioned to do that since he co-chairs that subcommittee. I would just note that for those recommendations and any other recommendations, it's really important to note that they are still in draft form.
Yeah.
And they're kind of, as they came up from the subcommittees, they have not yet been approved by the Climate Council. There's still further deliberation there to happen.
Okay, so we've all got your testimony now, and it's posted, I believe, and so
I can wait.
we'll circle back. Okay,
And if I could
yeah, Rep.
just add a brief clarification, since here the committees have a great deal of authority. In the Climate Council, their only authority is to make recommendations to the council as a whole. The council as a whole is the only body that can make decisions.
Yes.
Okay.
In terms of how council members are involved in the creation of the climate plan, that's evolved a little bit over time. But for this planning process, the revised plan that's due July 1st, the council members have become the primary authors of the climate action plan. And while the Climate Action Office of the Agency of Natural Resources provides logistical support, most climate action plan drafting responsibilities currently lie with councilors. And they are summarizing the research and deliberation that's happening in council subcommittees and the council as a whole. So, for instance, I wrote a draft chapter on the scientific underpinning of the climate action plan. Councilor Tower wrote chapters related to cross-sector mitigation recommendations, but that's been kind of divvied up depending on councilor expertise and role.
And okay, and what, maybe we'll get into this later. What support does the climate office provide?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah.
Yeah, there's a number of forms of support that they provide. Part of it is logistical in terms of scheduling and hosting and recording meetings. Sometimes there are notes taken. Sometimes that's committee members' responsibility. There's also technical expertise that the Climate Action Office and staff from other state agencies provide. There are state agency and department staff that serve on the Climate Council, of course, but then also on all of the subcommittees and at least most of the work groups. But in terms of the division of responsibility for drafting of recommendations, drafting of chapters, that is certainly shared across councilors and state staff. But it's the primary authors of the chapters, the substantive chapters with regard to recommendations are primarily being drafted by councilors at this point.
I wonder sometimes about whether you guys need more support. Rep. Sebelia?
Well, he's first.
Okay.
Rep Campbell is first. Excuse me.
Legal support. What legal support does the council have? If you have questions about how a recommendation might, what impacts it might have legally.
Yeah, in the past, the council has received presentations from ANR's general counsel, from the Attorney General's office. It can be difficult because there are some questions in which there's matters of legal disagreement. That was certainly the case in terms of the initial creation of the Global Warming Solutions Act, where the Attorney General's office did an analysis that said it was entirely constitutional, whereas administration lawyers challenged that assertion. So there's not legal counsel for the council itself, as I understand it, but there is access to resources. But sometimes
we didn't say in the, I don't remember right now. We didn't say in the Global Warming Solutions Act, and the council shall have the legal support of the Attorney General.
I don't have the exact language in front of me. It does say, that the council shall, sorry, I'm going to misspeak because I don't have it exactly in front of me. But
I'll look it up. I just wondered if it's something that you.
There's a part of the plan that speaks to the council having access to and being able to request the support of state agencies. I don't think it's as specific and directive in terms of legal counsel.
Rep. Sebelia?
I think I can hold it.
Okay. Rep. Kleppner?
Also want to add to the list of things that the Climate Action Office provides to the council is sort of third-party neutral facilitation of council meetings. And they can be big. There are 23 counselors, and there are non-council subcommittee members and a lot of members of the public. And I think my experience was it was very helpful to have sort of a third party, not to have those meetings run by someone from the administration or someone appointed by the House or any of that, to have it run by facilitated by a third party neutral member.
Agreed. And I would just note that that's the facilitation isn't from the Climate Action Office. It's from an external consultant that's hired by the Climate Action Office.
They contract with them, yes.
Sorry, I was thinking, go ahead.
In terms of how the original or the initial 2021 climate action plan has been used, I provided another link to that in the written testimony. That plan contained over 200 recommendations because the scope of ambition in the Global Warming Solutions Act is fairly broad. There is a desire to reduce climate pollution, to reduce energy costs, to prepare for and adapt to increasing extreme weather events through resilience and adaptation efforts. And so, I'm not going to have time and will spare you going through all of those recommendations. But as somebody who serves on the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, I'm especially familiar with the recommendations that relate to climate pollution reduction. And in that realm, there were 3 high impact recommendations that were prioritized in the first climate action plan to cost effectively and equitably make significant progress towards the emission reduction obligations of the Solutions Act. And specifically, high impact in the plan had a specific definition, which meant recommendations that were expected to, by modeling, expected to deliver more than 10% of the needed emissions reductions in line with the 2030 Global Warming Solutions Act obligation. So those 3 recommendations, those 3 high impact recommendations were adopting California's Advanced Clean Car 2 regulations, amending Vermont's existing, or at the time existing, low and zero emission vehicle regulations. That has happened. That is the one significant high priority climate action plan recommendation for pollution reduction that has advanced and been implemented. The other 2 have not been implemented. One was to join the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which was a cap and invest program focused on reducing pollution and costs from the transportation sector. That effort actually began kind of falling apart just, a couple of weeks before the first climate action plan was due, but we pointed as a council to the possibility of a cap and invest program to cost effectively and equitably reduce pollution from the transportation sector, but that has not yet advanced that approach. There have been studies on that. Yes.
I remember all the conversation around TCI, and it was 13 states or something. It was a broader regional idea, like Reggie, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and it was developed, over a decade. Many New England and Northeastern states played a key role in developing that program design. But in 2021, a couple of key states pulled out. I think it was first Connecticut and then Rhode Island. Massachusetts, which had been spearheading the effort, I think was the last to pull out. One of the things that they said was one of the reasons it wasn't able to advance is that other states didn't step up. And at the time, Vermont's administration had not been supportive and did not go along.
You see, I think members of our administration were participating in the planning meetings, though, right?
Agency staff were, yeah.
Yeah, we heard that yesterday. So, okay, all right. So TCI.
And then the third high priority recommendation in terms of pollution reduction was a clean heat standard. So as you all know, as of now, only one of those 3 recommendations has advanced to implementation, and that's Advanced Clean Cars 2. And so without a cap and invest program and or a performance standard for the transportation and thermal sectors, there's no reason to have confidence that Vermont could meet our emissions reduction obligations or our energy affordability goals in the 2 sectors, transportation and thermal, that create the most pollution and the most energy costs in Vermont, let alone meeting those goals at an economy-wide level. There are many other important key recommendations beyond climate pollution and energy cost reduction recommendations that are also included in the first climate action plan. And a summary of those was provided in the Climate Council report to the General Assembly that was submitted in January, and that's linked in the testimony. And then finally, just kind of a status update in terms of how things are proceeding in advance of the July 1st deadline to deliver the revised climate action plan. We met as a council earlier this month to review the draft priority recommendations that had come up from subcommittees so that we could agree on what we want to share with the broader public in a series of feedback sessions that I believe you heard testimony about from Ms. Lazorchak yesterday. And I believe that there are 2 virtual and 7 in-person events around the state, and that list that you already have, but I also linked to it in my testimony. Certainly the efforts to revise the climate action plan are a significant effort, many hours of careful review and deliberation among parties trying to find common agreement. And it is certainly challenging in terms of the dynamics of many of the counselors are the volunteers who have full-time jobs separate from this, and like me are taking time separate from my job. I'm having to use a lot of flex time to volunteer as a counselor and then make up for it. And but that is what public service is all about. And I don't need to tell members of the House of Representatives about yes. So broadly speaking, a lot of the work in the late fall and early winter was at the subcommittee level. Now most of those recommendations have been lifted up to the full council, and most of the activity in terms of agreeing on reviewing chapters, reviewing the recommendations in terms of what ends up in the final revised climate action plan, that will happen at the full council level over the next number of months in both kind of in response to council dialogue and very importantly, the feedback that's provided by members of the public, stakeholders who review those draft recommendations and provide feedback. So I hope that is helpful. That's the context I wanted to provide.
Rep. Sibilia?
A couple of questions. So thank you very much for your testimony. And I think you've hit one of them, which is around the fact that you all are volunteers. But work that I do when I'm not here, which I kind of equate to this, and I want to make sure that it's a good equation. So I work on our regional economic development strategy. It's a public process. We bring in experts and focus groups, and we build a plan with strategies, but it's not a plan that is implemented. It's given to our regional development corporation, who then builds an implementation plan. Is that similar to how the climate plan works, and then the work, the connection to the agency?
I think that's a very accurate analogy in two ways. I mean, one is we're relying extensively on additional expertise held outside of the council. So let's give an example. Earlier this week, we had a full council meeting where there was a presentation of a consultant report on cap and invest policy options. There was a report written up by the treasurer's office in relation to that. And we had speakers from 4 different jurisdictions, from Washington State, from New York, from California, and from Quebec, about how their cap and invest programs work to inform our recommendations as a council. And then I think the second way that it's a really good analogy is that the Climate Council is not an implementation body. We make recommendations that are either then acted on or not by the legislature or by agencies or departments of state government.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And I'm happy to hear that Councillor Cowart is going to be talking more about thermal. Of course, I'm anxious to see us take what we've learned with where we are right now with the clean heat standard and understand how we'll be bringing forward what other ideas you all are coming up with on that. So I'll wait for that. I do have to run for an amendment. I would be remiss, and if you reviewed our testimony, you probably know where I'm going to go next with this. But as a member of the steering committee, Councillor Duval, I spoke with Director Lazorchek yesterday about my ongoing frustration about our ability to get to the end of the road in rural Vermont. And I wonder, as a volunteer, I also asked if there had been a fund request to do that work, which there was not. But as a counselor and as a member of the steering committee, I'd like to hear from you why we are not getting there and what it's going to take to get to the end of the road in rural Vermont. This is really important. These are under capacity and deeply impacted communities.
When you say reaching those communities, do you mean in terms of the effect of the recommendations in terms of support, or do you mean in terms of public engagement, hearing from them on the
public engagement, going to the nearest, I work in Brattleboro. I enjoy Bennington, but you're missing the rural communities that are very isolated in southern Vermont and next here there. And I imagine in the kingdom as well by going to the large. I know you're not going to go to all 250 towns, but what do we need to do to get you all to our rural communities and engage in a bit more? And I know you're a volunteer, but help me here.
members of the Climate Council have been willing to and eager to attend the public engagement events that are set, but we don't organize those. I know that there was an attempt by the Climate Action Office, and it's difficult, right? In terms of if you're going to do 9 meetings in the span of a month, we can't visit every community, but I know that they made an intentional effort to, be in as many different regions of the state as possible with those 7 different regions, so that at least, there was one that was at least in driving distance for every Vermonter. I think more can and should continue to be done to hear the feedback of all Vermonters. I do think there are logistical challenges just in terms of the time and capacity, but that's not a good reason.
Well, and I appreciate that. And, we did hear from Director Lazorchak that there was some work also at the RPCs, but I would ask you as a steering committee member to really think about how we can get further into these rural communities. I think our chair has agreed to have the RPCs come in to speak about this.
Yep.
But it's really, it's a really, this work is important, and hitting and hearing from all Vermonters, particularly those who are isolated and deeply impacted. I apologize. I'm going to have to leave shortly, and I'll be back.
And I know that there is a special benefit, and it's different kind of in person versus online, and that it can be even better to be in person. But for those folks who cannot attend one of those, I believe 7 in-person events, that I know that the Climate Action Office is organizing, and counselors will attend 2 virtual events that. Yes.
So as many of us, this is the Digital Infrastructure Committee, and we can attest that it's not robust in our rural parts of the state. So we're working.
Thanks, Rep. Sibilia.
Sorry.
Hands, Rep. Klevner?
2 things. One, certainly recall talking about public engagement and thinking, gosh, if we're going to drive 2 hours with a bunch of people and at a stage, we want to talk to as many Vermonters as we can. But I'm just listening to Rep. Sibilia's comments. I think it may be worth saying, if we're doing 7, let's do one where we're only going to get 5 people. Let's go to a tiny town and get 5 people who we would not otherwise be able to talk to. Just as a possible thought, as a criterion into the mix. The other question I have, from your data perspective, is something that I've been trying to get a hold of. And I would just ask you to think about whether there are sources of this data that you could share later. So I've really been wondering about the direct effects to Vermonters of reducing emissions. Because, our reduction of emissions is not going to make the floods any less frequent. So what are the benefits in terms of direct health benefits to Vermonters of reducing emissions? Economic benefits, direct economic benefits, like those direct benefits would be helpful as we try to balance, per Commissioner Tierney's last final farewell speech, how we balance protecting Vermonters right now from the threats that they are facing, versus longer term thinking. And that, it's not a clear balance, that's complicated, and that would be helpful. So thank you for thinking about that.
Absolutely. There's data that I can follow up and provide, but immediately just, right now I can say that I think that there's at least 3 really important benefits of pollution reduction to consider. One is economic benefits, one is health benefits, and then one is benefits in terms of doing our part to address climate destabilization. So you're right that, of course, that in terms of Vermont's overall emissions or one person's emissions, that is not going to change the course of the global climate trajectory. But it is also true that every ton matters, in that every additional marginal ton of climate pollution contributes to increased warming, increased climate destabilization, and the likely increases in the frequency and extreme nature of extreme weather events. So I don't think we should have, because every single person, every single state, every single country could make that argument, and it becomes a collective action problem and a tragedy of the commons if we all throw our hands up and say, just because my pollution as a person or as a state isn't going to change the course of the global climate, that therefore I'm going to throw my hands up. There is always a benefit, a marginal benefit for each ton of pollution that is reduced. But more to your question on the economics of this, I think we need to never lose sight of the fact of the cost of the status quo. So right now, Vermont spends $2 billion a year. If we think about our overall fossil fuel bill, that's mostly gasoline, diesel, fuel oil, and propane. And those are high cost, expensive fuels. And what that translates to for household budgets is about $5,000 to $8,000 a year in energy costs for the average Vermont family. And those costs are high. They're also unpredictable and unstable because of the volatility in the global fossil fuel commodity market. And what we know is that there are solutions with modern technology and with best practices to lower those energy costs, including, for example, if right now you are deciding to replace your vehicle or get a new vehicle, do you add up the costs of maintenance and operations and fuel of a gas vehicle over its lifetime versus a comparable electric vehicle over its lifetime? Over its lifetime, $9,500 in avoided costs from driving an electric vehicle on savings from maintenance and gasoline purchases versus that gasoline vehicle. That's really significant, and it can be even higher savings if folks drive more miles. An example on the thermal side, on the heating side, heat pump water heaters are like 4 times more efficient than combustion water heaters. So if your water heater goes, say it's a propane water heater, and you have this choice, do I replace it with another propane water heater or do I put in a heat pump water heater? Over its lifetime, not even taking into account incentives, on average, a heat pump water heater saved $3,000 in fuel costs as opposed to a propane water heater. So there are these very practical, if our concern is energy affordability and energy cost savings, the status quo is not serving us well. And I don't think there's any path to energy affordability as long as we remain exposed to and dependent on these high cost, price volatile, polluting fossil fuels. And we now have the proven practices, whether it's weatherization, the proven technologies, whether it's EVs and heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, that not in all instances, the transition is especially difficult in gas territory, where the economics of switching from gas space heating or water heating to heat pumps often does not pencil out yet. So I want to be very honest and clear about that. This is not an across the board statement, but for those folks who are currently, heating their water with propane or fuel oil, switching to a heat pump water heater is very likely to save money over time. For folks who are driving lots of miles in an inefficient gas vehicle, switching to an electric vehicle is very likely to save lots of money over time. And then, of course, there are the health benefits, and I'm happy to follow up more on that as well.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Rick Campbell?
So all that's very interesting. I wanted to return to the kind of structure of the council, and I did that. Something was in my mind about when I asked you about the legal support, where the statute required legal support, and I looked that up, and actually there's a change to that in H 289. The statute now says the council shall have the administrative, technical, and legal assistance of ANR and public service, and may request the assistance of any executive branch, agency or department. So you don't have sort of a dedicated legal staff, but you have the legal advice, I guess, legal assistance of ANR and Department of Public Service by statute. Is that great?
Yeah, thank you for looking specifically at that. I was just going based on my recollection. I do think that there is a challenge for the council as a whole and for individual councilors that are reading and trying to follow the Global Warming Solutions Act to rely on legal counsel of an administration that is opposed to that very law.
Yep. Okay, interesting. And H 289 would remove the reference to legal. So the council would have not even access to that, to the legal counsel, legal advice or assistance, I guess, from those agencies. Which leads me to the
sort of broader question of the impact of H289 on the council, it would really change the role of the council. And I'm sure you've thought about that. I just wondered if you share some thoughts about to what extent the council would remain relevant and what role would it have if we come to it. I'd be happy to address that. I also want to, if it's okay for Councilor Cowart to, and then I can come back to that. I just want to make sure I don't take too much time for.
Why don't we,
I would love to come back. I would love to address that question. I'd also love to address topics related to cost effectiveness and net versus gross emissions accounting in follow up.
Great. So let's, I've been jotting down some questions to return to as well. So let's, role of council. I had some questions also about the role of council, cost effectiveness. These were also my questions, and 289. Okay, so alrighty. Yeah, why don't we switch just to make sure that we provide time for Councilor Howard's testimony and questions, and then we're still doing okay. I think floor is at 10:30, so we'll want to. I'd say we'll want to allow members a break before we go to the floor for our judicial retention thing. So I think 10:40, 10:20 is our target. All right. For the record, thank you for joining us.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Richard Cowart. I'm a appointed member of the Climate Council and chair of the cross-sector mitigation, co-chair of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. One of the structural things Jared did a great job of laying out the answers to a lot of questions that you asked. He didn't mention specifically that one of the ways that we work together is by having co-chairs of different committees including a member from the administration and a member from the legislatively appointed councilors, for the most part in these committees. And that I think has been a really important mechanism to facilitate collaboration. Let me say at the outset, I'm speaking only for myself as an individual councilor, not for the organization that I work for, and not for the council as a whole, because we aren't authorized to do that. None of us are. I was appointed specifically to fill a position, which is a member with expertise and professional experience in the design and implementation of programs to reduce climate pollution. Those aren't the exact words, and that is my professional background. I've been engaged in this work for nearly 40 years. I'm going to talk. Jared did a good job of answering the specific questions about structurally how are things working, and I would like to kick it up a notch and talk at a bit of a higher level about three topics: collaboration, affordability, and cost effectiveness. And then I will greatly enjoy answering questions. I've been involved in public policy in Vermont for a long time, and I have many times testified that there is no better place to work. I work all over the world. I've worked in many states, a lot of different countries, and I'm just incredibly proud of Vermont and the way we make decisions in Vermont. And that spirit of working together is a spirit that I have experienced in my career in Vermont, many occasions in this building, elsewhere in state government. And I'm answering your question, Madam Chair, about how's it going. And here's the basic message I'd like to deliver. In the creation of the first climate action plan, we experienced, and I personally experienced, a a positive degree of collaboration between the legislatively appointed members of the council who were reading the text of the statute, as you all know, and the administration members who were really, rolling up their sleeves and working with us, and or we working with them. They were, it was a collaboration. And I know you heard yesterday from TJ Core about the comprehensive energy plan. I was thinking about that yesterday, actually, as I was thinking about coming here. And I opened up the comprehensive energy plan, which was written in the same time period, 21 and 22, that we were developing the climate action plan. And just to give you a sense of the degree of collaboration that was, and remember, the comprehensive energy plan was created just by the administration. And meanwhile, we were collaborating with them on the CAP. And so here's just a sample of, I'm going to give you 2 quotes from the executive summary. This comprehensive energy plan is structured to meet the greenhouse gas requirements of the GWSA and to be consistent with the climate action plan required by 10 VSA 592. In addition, and in support of these goals, then they lay out specific targets. And I'll just read the thermal. In the thermal sector, to meet 30% of energy needs from renewable energy by 2025 and 70% by 2042. Similarly, they laid out different goals that are consistent with what was being discussed for the CAP. And that's first quote. Second quote. This is under the heading, consider a clean heat standard. But this is the administration's climate comprehensive energy plan in 22. Although Vermont has a variety of programs that seek to promote low carbon fuel choices in various ways, the state does not have a unifying mechanism to ensure reduced emissions from this sector. You will hear, as you know, in the first climate action plan, the council recommended the creation of a unifying performance standard that would, on a measured pace, drive change in the thermal sector. And Climate Council is currently considering similar language that pointing out that in order to meet our goals, both for affordability and equity and for emission reduction, we need an overarching strategy of some kind that will keep us on track to save money and reduce emissions. And what I'm pointing out is that this was, in fact, what the administration said in the comprehensive energy plan in 2022. And it's, as you just heard from Councilor Duvall, it's still true that overarching strategy, and there are different ways to do it, but that overarching strategy of some kind is needed. And I'm happy to get into the details of how to make that affordable, how to make that achievable, practical. We don't need a moonshot here. We just need to make progress on a pace. So now today, we're back at it. We're creating a new climate action plan. And we're working, as you just heard, closely with administration officials to do so. And I would say so far, the degree of collaboration, rolled up sleeves, that kind of thing, is still pretty good. What we don't know, because we're not there yet, is the answer to this question. The administration is clearly continuing to support the process of the development of the plan. The question is, will they support policy action that would actually move us substantially towards the goals that the legislature has set. We just don't know the answer to that at this point. It just remains to be seen what degree of consensus we're going to be able to create on the council and deliver to you in the way of a climate action plan. I hope it turns out as it did last time, but I don't know. Second topic, affordability. Some of you know that I served 12 years as chair of what is now the Public Utility Commission. And I have to say that that's a really instructive learning experience, and particularly about what things cost. And also about the importance of investing in order to save. It was during my tenure at the PUC that we began the policy of requiring electric utilities to invest in energy efficiency. At the time, that was something new. But we were convinced on the evidence that investing in energy efficiency would save Vermonters a lot of money and improve reliability of the electric grid and reduce emissions, actually reduce all kinds of pollution from different kinds of electric generation. But in order to invest in energy efficiency, you have to have a source of capital in order to actually start the program. And we were able, as you know, when we began these programs, we were able to create a rate structure that collected that money so that it could be invested in the energy efficiency programs. But, you know, I'm just going to emphasize again, you can't save if you don't invest. And as you all know, as a consequence of that program of year after year after year of doing those investments and growing those programs and growing our expertise in how to deliver energy efficiency, we've now, I don't even know what the latest number is. Every time I check in, it's a bigger number. It's the last time I looked at net savings to Vermonters, $2.6 billion due to the investments made as a result of what is now Efficiency Vermont and the other efficiency utilities. So this is a lesson that I think we need to apply to the thermal sector. And that's what the Climate Council stated in the Climate Action Plan. And in fact, it's what the administration stated in the Comprehensive Energy. We know that we need to invest in thermal modernization in order to reduce fossil fuel costs and to improve health and safety. And as you just heard from Mr. Duval, we continue to spend roughly $2 billion a year to import fossil fuels, whose emissions we actually, are trying to avoid. And I won't go further on that one because I think Mr. Duval covered it pretty well. My last point is about cost effectiveness. And I'm just returning to that. Cost effective doesn't mean zero cost. It just means that the savings are greater than the costs. And you don't save if you don't invest. And you can't invest without a revenue source. So it's pretty simple economics, actually. And I think any business person would say, well, yeah, I think that's how it works. So we can talk further about, the various ways to measure cost effectiveness. There's a lot of experience in the electric utility world, the world that I feel really comfortable with. A lot of experience in different ways to look at cost effectiveness. Happy to discuss that. But I guess my bottom line here is, my message this is my message to my friends and colleagues in the administration, and also here, that, until the administration and the legislature can agree on a meaningful revenue source, we're not going to get the savings that would come from climate action. We need to run programs at scale, and we need to have and those programs aren't going to inspire the private sector to step up and do their part if they're not sustainable. On again, off again, funding sources don't work. What you want is to develop a workforce, what business is going to get into the thermal modernization business if they're not sure that the program that will drive that business is going to continue over time. And if they're not willing to go into the business, why would anybody want to work for them? There's a chicken and egg problem there. Maybe there's a 3-tier problem, and it's a chicken and egg and the next generation of chickens. But there needs to be an affordable, reasonable revenue source. It needs to be sustainable, and it most likely needs to grow over time, or have the ability to grow over time, in response to success in the field. Otherwise, we're stuck in the status quo. That's it from me. I'm happy to answer.
Rep. Sibilia?
I have a couple of questions and a comment. So thank you for your testimony. I can already hear the Petroleum Preservation Society twisting your words about raising money to save money. So I'd like you to maybe expand on that just a little bit about what you mean. It sounds a little funny, but we're talking about economic transition. So I'd like you to talk a little bit more about why that's necessary.
Well, I'm going to give the example again of the electric utility energy efficiency programs, because the fact of the matter is that when those were first proposed, we heard the same argument. You're going to raise my electric rates in order to fund energy efficiency, so that we can avoid the next power plant. But it's a future savings. It's not, some of the savings show up right away, of course. And for participating customers, they show up right away. As soon as you get your more efficient refrigerator, you start saving money. But for non-participants, the question is, what's the payoff for them? The payoff for them over time is in lower savings across the whole system. And they have the opportunity to participate in the program. We were very committed to the principle that energy efficiency program designs have to be designed so that everybody can participate. Now, taking those lessons, I would also add, and as an additional factor, and I think we've learned a lot about energy burdens since we started those efficiency programs, that we need to pay special attention to low and moderate income households, and we need to have programs that directly address them, that provide extra incentives to deliver savings to those households. And frankly, depending on how you design the program, you can also have a bill payment support program to ensure that lower income Vermonters are actually provided additional funds through LIHEAP or an equivalent program to help them through the transition without increased burdens. And so it's kind of a two-part thing. One part is make sure the program is designed to meet the needs of lower income households. And the other part is make sure the program is designed to help them pay the bill in the meantime. And I believe we can do both. And our thinking about a cap and invest program is that it should do both. And that's, a different way of looking at it than just thinking about it on one side of the ledger. I think we need to think about both of these. And I don't know if I've answered your question that way, but on that, I will say one more thing about it, though, which is that so far the cost of meeting our climate goals in Vermont in the energy sector, those costs have been borne on the electric sector. And the fossil sectors, I guess I should say, which are actually now the more polluting fuels, have not been participating as much in the transition. And my personal opinion is we need to rebalance the scales. I just don't see that it doesn't make sense to me to raise electric rates even more in order to pay for reducing the pollution that's being caused by the fuel sector. So now, last point on this: moderation and certainty. A lot of the problem with the way that the clean heat standard has been viewed it is uncertainty about its costs. It would be a brand new program, it'd be something new. What's it going to cost? And a lot of different estimates were flying around. And this is not my personal opinion. My personal opinion is that we should have, whether we do a clean heat standard or whether we do a cap and invest program or whether we do some other set of programs to reduce thermal emissions, put in a cost cap, very definite cost cap, right in the program design is an appropriate thing to do. For two reasons. First of all, to ensure everybody that whatever the cost is, they're going to be moderate. They're going to be well within the range of the volatility of fossil fuels over time. And that's one thing. And it should be moderate, and we should be prepared to start relatively modestly and grow gradually these programs. The second reason to do it is that it just puts an end to all the uncertainty about projections. What's the price of oil going to be 10 years from now? What's the cost of a heat pump going to be 10 years from now? Do we know? No, we don't. We can make educated, we can make, I don't want to call them educated guesses. I think they're highly, informed. But still, think about 3 years ago when Russia invaded Ukraine and the price of oil went up. What was it, $1.20 a gallon, like $2 a gallon, in a couple of months. And, it's worth noting that Vermonters paid that. But it wasn't because the cost of lifting a barrel of oil and the cost of refining a barrel of oil went up. It was just supply and demand. And all those windfall profits went into the hands of international oil companies to the tune of a couple $1 trillion. The last time I looked at those numbers. It was an enormous transfer of wealth from all of us to the owners of oil wells and refineries. And we had no say. We were just victims of that bad price spike. And I know the topic of risk sometimes comes up. And when we developed the energy efficiency programs for the electric sector, one of the reasons for doing it was risk, to avoid, to moderate risks on the power sector. And against price spikes, for example, or against something happening with a nuclear plant somewhere that would cause greater disruption in Vermont. And when we calculated the cost effectiveness of those energy efficiency programs, we actually included a factor for risk reduction. Like, one of the reasons we're doing this is that we're reducing risk, and risk reduction, like any insurance policy, is something that's worth paying for. And it was a relatively small, but important conceptual point to say this is worth something, and therefore it's worth investing in efficiency. And the same thing is true in the thermal sector. It's worth something to avoid the risk that we're going to get caught in a price spike, or if we're going to just be on sort of the volatile roller coaster of fossil fuel prices. Maybe I've answered your question. If you want to.
Has some questions. Okay, I have one other comment, if I might. So, I have heard you, and I don't know exactly what the reference is. So, talking about when we developed efficiency, what was your role in that? Were you at the PUC at the time?
I was at the PUC when we began the efficiency programs. And the first stage was requiring the individual utilities to develop and implement energy efficiency programs. And we did that for a few years. And later in my second term, I realized that as a state, it would be better for us to give utilities the opportunity to participate in a statewide program instead of every utility having to have its own program. And so I called for the creation of a statewide efficiency entity, which it was just about the time that my second term ended and Michael Dworkin became chair of the PSB. So PSB at the time. And so I was involved from the beginning of the whole process, but Michael Dworkin was chair of Efficiency Vermont. Was literally anointed.
Okay. And then I guess for my comment, so I believe that climate change is the most urgent issue for my children's future, as to that. And I think it is really difficult in small rural states like ours to draw on, to have at our disposal expertise, experience, flexibility, diplomacy, which is certainly necessary to help us, all of us, of all parties, of all branches of government, work through these issues. And I know through my work with both you and Councillor Duvall, former Councillor Kleppner, we are really fortunate, and it's very important work. And I also want to say that, in this age when you are being demonized for this work, when the work that you are doing, people are making personal attacks on you, as someone who has been available to work with all of us for decades in this state, I find to be reprehensible. I'm very sorry that that has happened, but I am incredibly grateful for your resilience and that you walk through that door and sit down and share with us your experiences again this morning, despite that ongoing. So thank you. That's it.
Well, thank you.
I think Rep. Campbell had his hand up first. I just want to be mindful of the time before we go on to our next questions. Do you have additional testimony you would want to share? We can always invite you guys back. I just want to make sure we definitely have to have a hard stop at 10:20. Rep. Campbell, Rep. Southworth, and
If time or I can.
and well, it'd be great to try to at least get through the stuff that you prepared for us today. So Representative Campbell.
Sure, I just, first of all, thank you, Howard, for all that you've done for the state over the decades. But also, I'd like to pose a question to you as somebody who's experienced in sort of energy program design. How you think of the role of the Climate Council would change under the recommendations of H 289. Same question I asked.
I think creating a council properly structured that can be an independent voice is an important factor in advancing the work in this really difficult area. And in the United Kingdom, they have something called the Committee on Climate Change, created by Parliament, that is an independent body with staff and authority, and their job is to speak truth to power as the expression goes about climate issues, and they can call out the government, including it's a parliamentary system. So if you're calling out the administration, you're calling out Parliament too. But they created it on purpose to create a voice that would be an expert voice to give them advice on how it's going. And I sort of keep that in mind a little bit, that the role of the Climate Council to some degree is to provide another perspective. Now, what you have created in the GWSA is a Climate Council that is an amalgam of legislative appointees and administrative appointees. And considering that when you consider that the administration actually, and I say this very neutrally, by the way, this is just like government 101, considering that the executive, whoever it is, has the staff and the agencies and the regulatory apparatus, that it's appropriate for the legislature to want, your side of that conversation to be well represented. And so that the goals that are established by the legislature in the law can be well represented on the council. Now, you've done that to some degree. There are days when I wish you had done it to a stronger degree. But if I haven't studied the proposed legislation in detail, but at first glance, it looks like what it does is basically say the legislature is backing off of making decisions here. We're going to give the authority to the executive branch to develop the plan, to control the council, to control the implementation process. And that, we're going to ask them to please try to meet these goals. Now, that, viewed very, this is, I think, my third climate plan that I worked on in this state, not to mention other states. And it seems to me that that's going back to where we were in 2011.
Yeah, so just briefly, it turns the council into more of an advisory role to the agency of natural resources. And I think one of the operative clauses is where it currently says the council would provide guidance to ANR, conserve form, content, and subject matter of rules to be adopted. The change would be to delete to be adopted and substitute recommended for adoption.
Well, excuse me. Yes, it does say that, and it also changes the composition of the council so that the administration representatives actually are advising themselves. So, which is okay. But I began my testimony by talking about the spirit of collaboration that the legislature intended to create in the GWSA. And in order for the council to be empowered to create a plan that would meet what were not just abstract goals, but actually, to be on a path to meet reductions in the real world. And so the combination of establishing targets to be met and creating a council I'm putting my hands this way to make the point that it is collaborative. It is still collaborative with a mandate to come up with a plan that would, as cost effectively as possible, as practically as possible, get as close as possible to meeting those goals. That was a change, and this would be a change in fact.
Thank you.
Representative Southworth?
Thank you. A couple questions.
Yeah.
So in terms of funding,
Yeah.
I'll go back to that.
Yeah.
Would it be a fair summation to say that you're looking at tax or fee per gallon? Is that how you're looking at deriving that funding?
Well, the idea of the clean heat standard was that as a performance standard, it required performance. It didn't set fee. And if either a combination of existing programs or new programs could meet the targets, then the obligation would be borne by the obligated parties, in this case, the fuel dealers and Vermont Gas. And in other words, it didn't set fee. We've had a lot of debates over how much it's going to cost and how much it might end up looking like. That's just a prelude to the questions. Creating a thermal energy benefits charge of some kind, which could be per gallon, or let's just make that the simplest version of it, is certainly an option, and it's not a bad option, in my opinion. It should be capped. It should be modest, and it shouldn't be any more than we're paying on the electric side for pretty much the same objectives. But if it were paid from the income tax, that would be fine too. If the investment fund that we're talking about could be collected in some other way, my objectives can be met. That is, we need sufficient funding to help Vermonters weatherize, to install cleaner heat options, and to save money over time. I'll give you a different example. I'm encouraged by the idea of what's called a on-bill finance, where we could create a mechanism that could afford for individual homeowners or business owners to invest in their buildings and borrow money from a pool of funds, which could be subsidized, and then to have that money paid back over time from the savings that they're getting on their fuel bill. So that the general idea there is that there's very low upfront cost. We know there's savings there. You pay back over time from the savings. And if you do on-bill finance, which is basically collected from the meter on a building, then the individual homeowner thinks perhaps, well, I may not be here long enough to get the full payback. That doesn't matter because the payback, the building has gotten the improvement and the building is paying back over time on the bill. So I apologize that I've now launched a whole new conversation about on-bill financing.
Yeah.
But we have a pilot program in Vermont right now called the RAP program, which is the first attempt to do this. And so far, the uptake on it has not been particularly good. But I think that's a matter of experience and time. And it could be an additional mechanism to finance where basically the savings that we know are coming from these investments will be the source of revenue to pay for them. You need the upfront capital to do it. So I've given you income tax, on-bill finance, a performance standard, a carbon cap and invest program, or some kind of thermal energy benefit charge, at least 5 options. And I want to close by saying they can be cost capped, they can be moderate, they can grow over time. They do not have to be, they do not have to impose difficult burdens on Vermonters in order for us to invest and save money over time.
And just one quick follow-up. You don't have to answer it now. You can answer it for the committee. In terms of affordability.
Yeah.
How would you define that so that people of low income, moderate income look at it in the guise that you want rather than the guise that they're looking at it as it's an absolute cost to them right off and they can't afford it?
Yeah.
It's just, you don't have to answer it now because we need.
No, and by the way, it's really an excellent question. I've thought a lot about it and we need to have a good answer for that. And I think I gave it 2-part. I mean, yes, I know we'll talk about this more.
Thank you.
And I said, that is an excellent question. So I held all my questions. So if we could get, Jack, if we could get these guys back.
Yep.
Thanks for the great conversation. And I think that we can adjourn. We have to be on the floor in 10 minutes.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time and,
Yes,